They say winter quiets everything, but the truth is, nothing screams louder than the things that walk when the temperature drops below freezing. Every year, as blue shadows stretch across empty roads and breath turns to mist, a handful of people encounter something so terrifying, so impossible, that they never stop talking about it. These aren't campfire legends or internet creepypastas. These are the stories they swear happened in real life. Tonight, you'll hear 3 frozen night horrors from people who barely escaped alive. And once you hear them, you'll never look at winter the same way again. Winter has always carried its own kind of silence. A silence that hides footsteps, swallows screams, and preserves secrets beneath layers of untouched snow. But behind this white calm lies a darker truth no one wants to believe. When temperatures plummet and the world slows to a crawl, something else wakes up. Something ancient. Something hungry. Tonight, this documentary takes you deep into 3 terrifying encounters. A man who found himself stalked by a shadow in a snowstorm. A family who learned their cabin visitor wasn't human. And a hiker who discovered what really lives beneath the frozen lake. These accounts have never been fully explained, but each storyteller insists every word is true. So brace yourself, because these aren't stories of winter. These are warnings. The night Ethan Turner nearly froze to death began like any ordinary winter shift. The kind where the roads were so empty you could hear the wind scraping across them like claws. He worked late at a rural gas station on the outskirts of Anchorage, and that evening the snow wasn't falling. It was attacking, blowing sideways in violent white sheets that made the world look like a broken TV screen. When his shift ended at midnight, Ethan bundled up, stepped outside, and instantly felt the storm swallow him whole. The wind roared in his ears. His headlights cut only a few feet ahead, and every instinct begged him to turn back, but Ethan hated calling his boss for help. So he drove. Half an hour in, the road vanished completely under the storm, and Ethan slowed to a crawl, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. That's when he saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road, barely visible through the blizzard, tall and unmoving, like a darker shade of night carved into the snow. Ethan slammed the brakes, heart pounding, and the figure didn't flinch. Thinking it was a stranded traveler, he honked, then opened his window to shout. But the cold outside felt wrong, too sharp, like inhaling broken glass. The figure slowly tilted its head, as if studying him, and a wave of dread rolled through Ethan's body so hard he nearly put the car in reverse. Before he could react, the figure stepped out of the beam of his headlights and disappeared into the white void. Ethan sat frozen, breath fogging the windshield, mind racing with possibilities. A lost hiker? Someone injured? Or something else entirely? When he finally forced himself to continue driving, he kept glancing in the mirrors, and each time he swore, he saw a shape pacing the tree line beside his car. At first, he thought it was just the storm playing tricks on him, until the shape darted closer, fast, too fast for any normal person. Then, with a violent thud, something hit the back of his truck. Ethan screamed and pressed the gas, tires spinning in the snow as he felt another heavy impact on the side of the vehicle. Whatever stalked him wasn't struggling against the storm. It moved like it owned it. Through the swirling white, a long arm slammed onto his passenger window, a silhouette too thin to be human, but far too tall to be anything he knew. Ethan's truck fishtailed as he sped forward blindly, praying the road didn't curve. The creature kept pace, its shape flickering in and out of sight, until suddenly, the storm broke enough for Ethan to see the old ranger station ahead, faint lights glowing through the snow like salvation. As he skidded into the parking lot, the impact stopped. The world went silent. Ethan stumbled out, running to the locked door and pounding on it like a madman. When the ranger finally opened it, the first words Ethan said through chattering teeth were, "Someone, something, was following me." The ranger frowned. "In this weather?" "Son, nothing's out there tonight. But when they stepped outside to inspect the truck, the ranger's face went pale. Along the snow-caked passenger side were dragging marks, long, deep grooves, matching fingers at least twice as long as a man's. And beside them, bleeding back into the storm, were footprints that weren't human, and weren't shaped like any animal they'd ever seen. The second story comes from a woman named Lila Cross, a wildlife photographer who rented an isolated winter cabin deep in the forests of northern Minnesota, one of those rustic wooden retreats with no neighbors for miles, no phone service, and a landlord who proudly advertised complete silence as part of the experience. Lila had booked it to finish editing her winter photo series, hoping the solitude would help her focus. She arrived on a late January evening, dragging her suitcase through knee-deep snow and laughing at how the cold felt almost alive out here. By the time she settled in, darkness had already swallowed the forest, leaving only the cabin lights glowing against the white landscape. That night, curled up by the crackling fireplace, she felt a rare peace. Right until the knocking began. It was a soft, deliberate knock, 3 taps coming from the door behind her. Lila froze. The landlord had mentioned no one else would be nearby. No hikers, no hunters, nothing. She slowly turned, staring at the wooden door, the sound still echoing in her ears. When she finally mustered the courage to approach it, she called out, "Hello? Who's there?" But the only answer was wind. Heart thudding, she unlocked the deadbolt and cracked the door open. Nobody. No footprints in the fresh snow either. She closed it quickly, trying to calm her nerves. Maybe wood expanding from the cold? Maybe she imagined it. She convinced herself it was nothing until an hour later, when the knocking returned, this time from the window. She jumped to her feet, knocking over her mug, and stared at the frosted glass. A shadow passed across it, slow and unmistakable, as if something massive stood just inches away from her. Lila grabbed her camera instinctively and snapped a photo through the window, even though she couldn't see anything clearly. When the shadow slid out of view, she shut the curtains, bolted the door again, and sat trembling by the fireplace with her camera in her lap. Minutes passed. Silence returned. Eventually, she dared to check the photo she'd taken. Her fingers shook as she zoomed in, and what she saw made every hair on her body stand upright. Behind the fogged glass was a face pressed against the window pane, long, with sunken eye sockets and no visible nose, as if frost itself had formed a human expression. She nearly dropped the camera. Before she could react, the knocking started again, but now it was coming from the back door, then the side door, then the windows. One after another, knocking in slow, circling patterns around the cabin, as though something was walking laps around the house, tapping to let her know it was there and wasn't leaving. She turned off every light, hid behind the couch, and pressed her hands over her ears. But the knocking only grew more deliberate, more patient, like the creature knew exactly where she was and wanted her to know it too. She whispered to herself, "Just wait until morning. Just wait until morning." But around 3 a.m., the knocking stopped completely. For a moment, the silence relieved her, until she heard soft, rhythmic footsteps inside the cabin. Slow, heavy, and too long between each step to be human. Lila held her breath as the footsteps moved down the hallway and stopped directly outside her bedroom door. The old wooden door creaked, and the knob turned just slightly. Not enough to open, but enough to let her know it could. When the sun finally rose, Lila burst out of the cabin and ran through the snow barefoot until she reached a ranger station 2 miles away. Later that day, when officers checked the cabin, every door and window was locked from the inside. And in the snow surrounding the cabin, there were no footprints at all, except Lila's. The third and final story comes from a 25-year-old paramedic named Evan Brooks, who spent most of his winter nights responding to emergency calls across rural Alberta, Canada, places where houses sat alone on flat, frozen land and winds carried sound farther than they should. One night, during a severe snowstorm, Evan received a strange dispatch. A distress call coming from an abandoned ice fishing shack in the middle of Blackwater Lake, a place locals avoided and whispered about. The message was simple, only a few seconds of audio, but enough to send a chill down his spine. A faint, trembling voice saying, "Help, I'm still here. Please," followed by what sounded like cracking ice and a sharp breath cut off suddenly. Dispatch had confirmed that the shack was supposed to be empty for years, but protocol demanded they investigate any emergency call, so Evan set out into the storm with his partner. The wind pushed against them like a physical force, and by the time they reached the frozen lake, visibility had dropped to only a few feet. Their flashlights cut through the blowing snow, revealing the old shack sitting alone on the ice-tilted, decaying, with boards rattling in the wind like someone knocking from inside. Evan approached first, boots crunching loud on the frozen surface. His partner stayed by the snowmobile, radio in hand. "Anyone inside?" Evan shouted, but the wind swallowed his voice. He pushed open the shack door, the hinges groaning like a long sigh, and stepped into the stale darkness. The air inside was colder than outside, unnaturally so, as if the cold inside didn't belong to the storm. His flashlight scanned the small space, an overturned stool, an old fishing hole in the center, frozen solid now, and walls etched with long claw-like grooves. At first he thought they were animal scratches, until he noticed they formed shapes, letters, words. "Help him, please. He's below." Evan's mouth went dry. He crouched near the frozen hole, scraping off a layer of frost, and that's when he heard it. A voice, directly beneath him. "Is someone there?" It wasn't a normal voice. It sounded wet, slow, as if spoken through water. Evan stumbled back, heart pounding. He called out, "This is EMS. Do you need help?" The voice replied immediately, "Don't leave me. It's dark down here." Evan's partner heard him shouting and rushed inside, but the moment he stepped in, the temperature dropped again, breath turning thick and white in the air. "Someone's under the ice," Evan whispered, but his partner shook his head, pointing to the shack walls. This place was sealed for years. No one could be under there. Evan didn't care. Training kicked in. He grabbed his ice pick, knelt by the frozen hole, and began striking the ice to break through. But as soon as the first crack formed, the voice beneath the ice changed. It deepened, distorted. "Do not open it." His partner grabbed his arm. "Evan, stop. That's not a person." Before Evan could respond, something hit the underside of the ice from below hard. The entire shack trembled. A second hit followed, then a third louder than before. The ice began splitting in jagged lines across the entire floor, spreading fast toward the walls. Evan and his partner bolted out the door, sprinting toward the snowmobile as the shack behind them groaned violently. They turned just in time to see the whole structure collapse inward, as if something gigantic had pulled it from below. The lake didn't crack normally, it opened. The shack vanished into black water, swallowed whole, leaving only shattered ice floating on the surface. Not a single ripple followed, as if the lake itself exhaled and went still. They reported everything, but officials later claimed no emergency call had ever been logged. No audio recording existed, and the lake was structurally stable. But Evans swears that 2 weeks later, while driving home after another shift, he heard the same voice faint, trembling coming from beneath a storm drain near his apartment. "Help, I'm still here." When you place these three stories side by side, Alex's frozen intruder in Wisconsin, Lila's cabin visitor circling the house in Minnesota, and Evan's voice beneath the ice in Alberta, you start to notice something deeply unsettling, something that ties them all together in ways no one initially understood. Each incident happened in the dead of winter, during nights when temperatures fell lower than normal, nights when the wind didn't howl naturally, but seemed to whisper and carry voices farther than should be possible. Each witness described a presence that wasn't quite human, too tall, too patient, too silent, and always appearing right after the coldest hours. And all three events began the same way, with a sound meant to draw them closer. Knocking, footsteps, a voice calling for help. It's as if something ancient had learned how humans respond to distress, and now uses it as bait. Experts tried writing off the stories as sleep paralysis, isolation, extreme cold hallucinations, but none could explain the physical evidence left behind. Alex's snow tracks that stopped abruptly. Lila's photograph of the deformed face on her window. The ice shack that collapsed into a lake locals swore was too frozen to break. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that something walks during winter nights. Something that only moves freely when temperatures are low enough to freeze sound and hide footprints. Something that can mimic human behavior just well enough to get close, but not well enough to pass as human. People believe winter is peaceful, quiet, safe. But these stories show the truth. Winter is when the world becomes still enough for the things beneath it, under the ice, inside the storms, around the abandoned cabins, to rise without being heard. And when you consider how far apart these locations are, yet how similar the encounters were, one chilling possibility remains. It's not three creatures, it's the same one. Traveling with the storms, moving across frozen lakes, watching from snow-covered windows. And if you ever hear knocking outside your house on a winter night, or a faint voice calling from somewhere cold and dark, remember this: you're not hearing a stranger asking for help. You're hearing something that wants you to open the door. Something that hopes you believe you're alone. Something that knows you'll step closer because humans always do. And by the time you realize the shape outside isn't human, it's already inside. Winter doesn't just bring cold. It brings visitors. And they're still out there, waiting for the next person who mistakes curiosity for courage. If you think winter is peaceful, think again. These three frozen night horrors show that the cold doesn't silence the world. It awakens something ancient, something patient, and something very hungry. The next time you hear knocking on a snowy window, footsteps crunching in fresh powder, or a faint voice calling for help when no one should be there, remember this: the danger isn't just outside. It's everywhere, watching, waiting. And the coldest nights, they're when it moves the fastest. You may never see it, but it will see you.